Well, welcome everyone. Welcome there in your own homes. It really is wonderful that we have this ability to all be zooming in from wherever it is that we're calling from the East Coast, the West Coast, Canada, all over. It's just great to see you all. As we mentioned, you are welcome to have your video on while you're eating your dinner. We recognize that it is about that dinner hour. I've got my plate of snacks here, so don't be shy if you want to turn your video on. We welcome that. I'm Mary Edmonds. I have the privilege of working here at the Faber Institute alongside Father Rick Gans, who at least on my screen is actually right next to me. And then on the other side is Paul Pastor, who Father Gans will introduce here in just a second as our guest speaker for this evening's class with our continued series on the Chronicles of Narnia and this specific class on the silver chair. So we're looking forward to having conversation around this book that might be the favorite of some of yours. Maybe some of you are in the process of reading it or have read it a long time ago, but it's sure to bring some good discussion. When we do have times of discussion that Paul invites some conversation, feel free to unmute yourself and you can join in the conversation that way. Or if you do the raise your hand feature or actually physically raise your hand, we'll all be keeping an eye out on who might be wanting to enter into the conversation. I'll also be keeping an eye on the chat, messaging on the side in case there's anything you need to bring to our attention or want to comment there. For now, I'm going to turn it over to Father Gans. He will introduce us to Paul Pastor, who will be leading us through this class this evening. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Mary. I'd like to begin by just offering a prayer that God will bless us tonight. And then I'm just going to do a brief introduction of Paul. I looked in the thesaurus under the word very cool to see if I could find all the synonyms to deploy in my introduction. I'd like to use this text from Philippians chapter 3, which shows up in the morning prayer for this day on the Feast of St. Agatha. I'll just read these lines, say a simple prayer, and then the introduction. It sounds like this. I even consider everything as a loss because of the supreme good of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake, I have accepted the loss of all things, and I consider them as so much rubbish, that I may gain Christ and be found in him, to know him and the power of his resurrection and the sharing of his sufferings by being conformed to his death. Come, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Help us to be only here, only now, until, with Paul's help and the sound horn or whatever it is, we are drawn into Narnia to be there with you for this next 90 minutes. Thank you for the words of the great ones who've gone before us, who are the signs that you ask us to remember, through which we maintain our solid grounding in hope. We place all of this in your hands this evening. Amen. I'd like to introduce Paul Pastor in a very simple way, turning away from credentials, of which he has many, and just saying this about him. I really trust this man, and I would be happy to be at his feet and learn anytime he were to speak. I hope you find the same esteem for him through the course of this evening. Paul, thank you for being here. All in your hands.
Well, thank you. It's such a centering moment to have Rick open up any time and space. So I just feel like we all need to collectively breathe for a moment and truly be right here. That trust is so kind, and I hope it's not misplaced as we are about to journey into the depths of Narnia together. Um, and I'm really glad, Rick, it's the synchronicity of the Holy Spirit that you read the passage that you read, because those words of Paul, I have accepted the loss of all things. I can't think of a better lead in to this book and what I hope we all draw from this book than those words. I have accepted the loss of all things.
Hmm.
What I think the silver chair does for us, and we'll spend the rest of our time together discussing it and enjoying the characters of Puddle Glum and Jill Pole and the rich imagery and everything else that's fun about this book for children. But part of what the silver chair does for us is it allows us to see the corner of how a spirit or a soul could express what Paul just expressed. I have accepted the loss of all things.
Yeah.
How can one do that? This is in many ways the saddest of the Narnia books. It's sadder than the end of the world, the final battle
Hmm.
that Lewis pens. And it's so sad because on the surface, it is a story that doesn't go anyplace good.
Hmm.
If you plot the story, and spoiler alert, I'm sorry if you haven't finished reading the book. It came out in 1953, so you're a little bit late. I hope it's okay to really talk about the spoilers here. We're going to have to. But if you think about where the story begins, here's Prince Rilian with two parents, a young, innocent boy going out into the woods. And you think of where it ends, the loss of time, the loss of his mother. This is a story of profound grief and profound loss, on its surface at least. And so part of what we're going to look at tonight is how somebody could say those audacious, shocking, and nearly offensive words. I have accepted the loss of all things. So let's hold that in our minds and hold that in our hearts as we turn together to the silver chair. At any point during this time, I know I've got some very specific things I want to say. I'll be flying and talking and everything, but this really is a two-way street. It's a discussion. I'm grateful for the gift of Zoom. It's allowing us to be here from around, different time zones, different parts of the country, but also it's hard not being in the same physical room as you all, being able to have that energy and that eye contact. So do feel free at any point to like slip up a digital hand or turn on your screen and wave at me if you have something you really want to contribute. But right here, just share my screen here. Just give me a moment. And can everybody see this? Yes, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to dive right in to the silver chair. And I've taken the liberty of filling this presentation with some of the beautiful images by Pauline Baines, who is Lewis's own illustrator and just the greatest of all the Narnian illustrators. So first, let's ask, what are we looking for tonight? Well, I've given a hint in that connection with the reading from St. Paul that Father Gans shared. I have accepted the loss of all things. We're looking for images and ideas that can move both ways. Why are we, who are mostly all fairly grown up and responsible adults, sitting around to study a children's story? Taking time from our busy schedules and our valuable attention and studying a children's story, because Lewis put into this book ideas and images that were intended to do something in our souls. There's something practical for the soul to be discovered here, something, dare I say, useful for the soul. We're not just being entertained by this. This isn't just something to sort of tickle our brains with philosophical, abstract ideas. There is something livable and practical and useful for the spiritual journey that's here. We want that to bleed into our own lives. And that seeking overtly is the point of Narnia. This is the thesis of Narnia. As Aslan said in the last book that this group read, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, in your world, I have another name. You must learn to know me by it. That was the very reason why you were brought to Narnia, that by knowing me here for a little, you may know me better there. Through Aslan's voice, the author of these stories is telling us that there is something that we can take away from the fantastic, imagined world of Narnia to the very real flesh and blood world that we live in every day. So that's what we're going to be looking for. Now, I'm going to say something that could be controversial. That books, the silver chair is actually the one with the most to give us in this way. And for that reason, it is my favorite. I would argue that it has the greatest depth of resources for the soul, particularly for souls that are experiencing grief, tragedy, loss, disappointment, and darkness, that its gifts are more applicable to us than any of the other Narnian books, great as they are, wonderful as they are. I think the silver chair is the most. So I'm going to begin by reading a brief passage from the beginning of the book. We're going to cover in just a moment the main plot points as a refresher. So if you feel briefly lost, you won't be for long. We're going to come and just hit the basic bullet points of the plot so that we're all caught up and on the same page. But let's begin with this really excellent speech given by Aslan to Jill Pole in Aslan's country. This is before Jill has any context for this great and terrifying lion. She's thrown out of the world we're living in here now into this very strange, very different place. And all she is disoriented. All she is afraid and thirsty. There's a beautiful stream running through this country. She feels that she's dying of thirst, but there's a problem. To get to the stream of water, she has to go past the lion. The delicious rippling noise of the stream was driving her nearly frantic. Will you promise not to do anything to me if I do come? Said Jill. I make no promise, said the lion. Jill was so thirsty now that without noticing it, she had come a step nearer. Do you eat girls? She said. I have swallowed up girls and boys, women and men, kings and emperors, cities and realms, said the lion. It didn't say this as if it were boasting, nor as if it were sorry, nor as if it were angry. It just said it. I daren't come, said Jill. Then you will die first, said the lion. Oh dear, said Jill. Oh dear, indeed. Let's, as we consider this story, hold in our minds the image of the lion that can swallow everything. Couple facts first. Here's a cover of the first edition, The Silver Chair, A Story for Children by C.S. Lewis. First published September 7th of 1953. It's the fourth of the Narnia books, and the book, of course, after The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which Lewis had initially intended to be his last. So this is, as the kids might say, the gritty reboot of the Narnian saga here. Lewis is returning to Narnia after thinking that he was done with this world. Beautifully illustrated, as I mentioned before, by Pauline Baynes. And if you haven't seen her original illustrations for the entire book, it's worth going out and finding an edition of the book that contains them, just because they're so playful and artful. So we can assume that the book is set in 1942, based on a chronology set off of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which we can assume took place in 1940 during the Blitz. Let's see. There we go. And here are the essential plot points. Pardon as I go through this brief summary, but I just want to be sure that we're all on the same page so that we can fully appreciate this. It starts with Eustace Scrubb, and a picked-on Jill Pole being bullied at Experiment House, which is this forward-thinking, progressive new school where everything looks great on the outside, and on the inside, it's a very, very different story. Things get so bad that they ask Aslan to go to Narnia. And if my memory serves, I think this is the only book of the Narnia series where it's prompted by a request from this side.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Hold that in mind. Based on that, they are taken to Aslan's country. The magic happens, where Jill promptly causes Eustace to fall off a cliff. They are given the task of rescuing the lost Prince Rilian. Jill, I should say, is given that task, or perish in the attempt. And signs, 3 signs that are supposed to accompany and empower them on that task. So Jill, who has just showed herself to be quite untrustworthy by showing off near the cliff's edge, and she's just a kid. I don't blame her too much for it. But still, Lewis tacks it up to a character flaw. In spite of that, she is entrusted not only with going after Eustace, but of rescuing lost royalty in this strange country. The pair of them go to Narnia, where the quest starts badly. They miss completely the first sign that she was supposed to remember. And the pair are given little more than the aid of Puddleglum, the marshal, who appears, at least on the surface, to be the consummate pessimist. I think, by the way, that perhaps except for Reepicheep, he is Lewis's best character in all of his fiction. Together, that party of 3 fares north through many perils until they fall, literally fall, underground, where they are captured by the Earthmen, who are in the surface of the Emerald Witch, who is keeping a mysteriously enchanted knight for a nefarious plot to conquer Narnia from below. Doesn't take a lot of logic to figure out that this knight locked in the black armor is none other than the lost Prince Rilian, who must be bound every night in a magic silver chair, because for an hour every night he goes mad. Or is it that he goes sane? The group sets him free. They confront the witch, and Puddleglum's loyalty and soggy feet save them from her enchantment. Rilian slays her when she is in the form of a snake. The group escapes through Underland as it collapses, looking into the yet deeper world of Bism. Come back to that. Until they travel through the tunnel intended for Narnia's invasion, because this whole army from the underground was trying to burst up into the surface and conquer Narnia. And they return the lost prince. Rilian is reunited with his father Caspian, who promptly dies. And the children return then to Aslan's country, where they witness the dead King Caspian restored to life by Aslan. Aslan, Caspian, and the children return to our world, where Experiment House is given a lesson by Aslan, Caspian, and the now tough kids that transforms the school. So this raises the question, who is rescued in the silver chair? I'm going to take a moment here and we're going to discuss. So please feel free to pop in or to raise your hand, whatever works best for you. And please help us think through this question. There may be more than one correct answer.
Well, Paul, I'll offer this. I feel that I am every time I read the story.
Let's return to that, Rick. That's a really beautiful way of thinking about it.
Ari or Elizabeth, do either of you guys want to jump in?
I think everyone but the witch and Puddleglum are rescued. Witch because, and And then Puddleglum is the one who does most of the rescuing.
Yes. Wonderful.
Yes, I agree
Thank
with
you.
that. I was thinking more of Cole and Eustace. They were saved from their problems at the school. They were trained, and they grew up quite a bit, and then they were returned different people.
Absolutely.
I thought it was Narnia that was rescued.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is wonderful. I don't want to cut off anybody who has something to contribute, but I think we have covered most of the main ones. Aurelian is rescued. Caspian is rescued. Narnia itself is rescued. Eustace, in a way, is rescued. But in my opinion, the best answer is Jill Pole. And why is that? The main reason is that she's the only dynamic character in the book, as Eustace was in the last one. And here's what I mean by that. Screenwriters and novelists will use the term static and dynamic characters to talk about whether or not a character changes over the course of the plot of a film. You can think very quickly about, say, the character of Judas in the Gospel is quite static. You see a little bit of change, but pretty much the person Judas is at the beginning is the person Judas is at the end. Peter, on the other hand, is dramatically dynamic. He's growing like crazy. He's going backwards. He's going up, down, and sideways. So Jill is the only character who truly transforms from the beginning of the book to the end, at least the one who transforms the most, we can say and agree. She is also the only character who participates in every scene. Even Eustace and Puddleglum can come and go for Lewis. Jill has to be there or the scene doesn't work. It's a powerful clue to what C.S. Lewis was thinking about as the central character of this book. So if this is true, here's why this matters at all. I think we have to look to Jill Pole's journey as the key to the story, because she is the hinge. She is the center point of the plot's true conflict and resolution. So with that, we're going to look really quickly at this map that I couldn't remember who the illustrator was. This one's not from Pauline Baynes. This came, I think, in the 1980s from a later edition. Anyone who knows better than I do, please correct me if I'm wrong. But I want to point this out because this map is actually a really terrible map of the silver chair. It's great at illustrating what happens in Narnia. But if Jill Pole is the key to the story, the two most important locations, arguably, in the book, even though they're very short, are missing from this map. Experiment House, Our World, and Aslan's Country. Because it's in those places that are these little frames almost that we ignore on either side of the real part of the book that we get to see the true dynamism of what I think is actually happening here. So this map is leaving out the most important parts, Aslan's Country and Experiment House. And remember, one of the cardinal rules of storytelling is that the beginning and the end of a story have outsized meaning, outsized leverage. Where something starts and where it ends makes the difference between a comedy and a tragedy. So this is actually a wonderful chart that my daughter Elia drew up for us, plotting the slightly different type of map. And here's what I'd like to point out here. And can you see my mouse cursor as I'm moving? You can, yes, okay. So including this slightly different map, this is a map of now it's gone. There it is. This is a map of the ups and downs in the book. The Silver Chair's plot can be very interestingly correlated with how high or low the characters in the story are. They go way up and they go way down. So we're just going to briefly review this as a clue to unlocking what I think is really one of the key images of the book here. So starting with Experiment House, we can say that's maybe in the middle, right? Middle of Earth, middle world. Eustace and Jill go up to Aslan's country. We remember from the Voyage of the Dawn Treader that these are the mountains beyond the end of the world. They're impossibly high. From there, they go down to Narnia, which is, a bit quotidian, probably on roughly the same level as Experiment House. Then conceptually, they're moving up. They're going up in the north. They go up into the mountains and up to to Harfang, the falsely named abode of the gentle, quote, quote, giants, who of course turn out not to be so gentle. From there, they go down. They go down to Underland. They go down to the witch's palace and the sunless sea. They go down to the witch's living room where the great climax of the plot happens, or so it seems on the surface. Then they go down and they look at Bism, which is a really, really interesting point that we'll return to later. Then through the tunnel, they have this gradual rise back up until they pop through the earth back in Narnia. Reconciliation happens where Rilian is reintroduced to Caspian. All of them return. They go up to Aslan's country and then back down to Experiment House and all of the change that happens there. We'll come back to that. So with all this in mind, this is a rescue from enchantment story. We can see that. But I believe that the Emerald Witch is really only the secondary villain. And if Jill is a central character, then the true story of what's happening is what nearly all of us ignore when we read the book, and what was missing from that one map, Experiment House. But perhaps both are pointing us to the same sort of story. And here's where I want you to think about that passage I read at the beginning with Aslan, with being swallowed up, being gobbled by something. So let's look at, just very briefly, the two main quote, quote, villains that we experience here. There's the Emerald Witch, who uses false words to enchant and dominate. Experiment House does the same thing. Lewis goes to great lengths to tell us that the language that they use to describe their education there actually isn't reflective of what's truly happening there. There's some level of deception. The Emerald Witch torments the innocent. So does Experiment House, both through the bullying that's happening and through the fact that the people who are in charge, who have authority, aren't believing what's going on, aren't taking action, but in fact are honoring the people who are the bullies. The Emerald Witch makes you feel that there is something wrong with you, that you're the crazy one. So does Experiment House. The Emerald Witch mixes you up, confuses you until you're not sure if you're the sane one or not. So does Experiment House. And the Emerald Witch is beautiful. She looks so good on the surface. So does Experiment House. Think for just a moment of the contrast between the Emerald Witch and Puddleglum. The Lady of the Green Kirtle's beautiful voice, her song, her tra-la-la, her beauty of form and face. She's warm, she's bubbly, she's effervescent, and it's hiding death inside. Then think of Puddleglum, the very picture of dour pessimism, but on the inside is all hope and joy. Lewis is showing us something. The outside and the inside are different. Something can look great and kill you. Something can look terrible and save your life. We see this with the gentle giants, who are the picture of hospitality, but actually want to devour you, and with so many other different points throughout the story. This is why Jill is able to be saved through this experience. Because when she returns to Experiment House, she has experienced the way that the world really is. Talk more about this in a second here. So Lewis is talking about something foundational, I believe. This story is about deliverance from the danger and bondage that occurs when people begin using words the wrong way.
Hmm.
Are the gentle giants gentle? The gentle giants are not gentle. And because they are called the gentle giants, the party very nearly gets eaten for the autumn feast, right?
Hmm.
Hold that for a moment. We'll come back to it. So briefly, we'll just look at and appreciate some of the symbolism in the colors of the book, which I think will also contribute for us here. First, let's look at the concept of green and the symbolism of the Emerald Witch. Think for a minute. We often don't examine the deep symbolism of color, but green is a really unique one. It's deeply changeable. It's both life and it's poison. It's the green sprouts of spring, and it's the mold that you find on bread or on a corpse, right? It sprouts and decay. So green is uniquely suited to deception, where what looks like life is actually death. Ooh, that's really interesting.
Hmm.
As well, Puddleglum calls her not just the Green Witch, not just the Lady of the Green Kirtle, but he assigns her a more specific name, the Emerald Witch. Lewis, of course, is a medieval scholar at Oxford. He's steeped in medieval lore and understands this very different approach to science than we might have today, and the rich symbolism of a world that believed it was enchanted and was full of rich spiritual meaning. So emerald in particular has a rich symbolic history, which he as a medieval scholar would have known well. It's not the green of soft life, but it's hard and it's sharp. It's also the stone that was sacred to the god Hermes, who conducted the dead to the underworld. Ah, that's interesting. It's the stone of occult knowledge. And in fact, some of the traditions said that an emerald fell out of Lucifer's head when he fell from heaven, according to some of the old traditions. It was a manifestation of power. In medieval tradition, if you put it on your tongue, if you put an emerald on your tongue, you could do magic. You could summon spirits. There's language, like it does something to language, to words. And the Christian lapidary, which is kind of the dictionary of stones and what they mean, associated it with the most dangerous inhabitants of hell. So Puddleglum, by calling her the Emerald Witch, is saying something more specific. He knows something about her. She's not just the Lady of the Green Kirtle. There's something more specific that's here. And then, of course, in modern parlance, think of Harry Potter. Green and black are the colors of Slytherin, symbolized by a serpent. There's lots of interesting symbols that we can pick at there. Let's also look briefly at why a silver chair. Why is it silver? Well, silver in the medieval mind corresponds to the moon, which of course is a symbol of lunacy. So you would expect that a silver chair would be associated with madness. It's also a metal that corresponds to water and to the underground. It's of darkness and night, as opposed to gold, which is of light and the sun. Aslan, of course, throughout the Narnian Chronicles is constantly spoken of as being golden, as having this golden glow. So here's light as well, right? A light and hard metal, but it's evil, but it's dark, it's different. Silver also symbolizes passivity and clarity, that kind of madness that tells the truth is what we might expect to find from somebody sitting in a silver chair. Holding all of that, and I promise we're going to pull this all together in a way that's really crisp here. Why, when they're leaving the palace after the destruction of the queen, or of the witch, why does the ground open and we suddenly see all the little earthmen who previously were these zombified henchmen of the witch, now joyful, now restored to their right minds, returning to this strange land called Bism? You remember this scene? The ground opens, the party looks down, and they see this glowing river of fire with orchards of jewels. And one of the inhabitants says, yeah, well, up here on the surface, you have dead jewels, but down there you can eat a ruby and you can drink diamond juice. And it's this place, the really fascinating life. Tell me for a moment, what for you, and let's actually discuss this, is the significance of Bism? So I'll just open it up here. I'd really like to hear what your take is on this deepest of all deep places for Lewis.
Well, the first thing I thought of was that the silver chair tarnishes, that's one of the essences of silver. I don't think that answers your question here, but I always wondered about that.
That's a good point. It's corruptible in a way that gold is not.
Mhm.
One thing, this is Gary. I was really intrigued by that question of what is the place of Bism? And it seemed like what Lewis was doing is he was constructing a whole alternative universe that lives underground. And any universe has to have some place that beckons in the form of joy to the people who live there. And it's clearly what they're yearning to go back to Bism, and it has all those exquisite, juicy gems and so on. And so at some level, even though these folks are living underground, they're liberated from the queen and they want to go to the heaven that's down. And I just find that fascinating, but there has to be a place that we yearn for.
Oh, I love that. We'll talk much more about that. Yes. Any other thoughts? What's the significance of Bism?
Well, Gary, I just thank you so much for that comment. I was really helped by that because it's always been kind of a puzzle to me. The part that always struck me about Bism, for a place so dark, not only in the underworld, but even beneath the underworld, was the unexplained and obvious joy of the place. So it seemed like joy, I associate with joy was up, in Narnia and in Aslan's country. Here it's deeper down. And so it just sort of stuck in me as a riddle I couldn't quite figure out. But the joy was obvious. That was characteristic.
And one other aspect of it that really struck me is it's the source of the glow that we're constantly reminded that there's something radiating from this sort of shell of the underworld at the top. And it's coming from Bism. It's coming from Bism. There's something beautiful that is risen up, and it's obviously a place of joy for the underworld people, but it's actually being reflected from the roof of this underworld as a place of some form of beauty, some form of radiance.
Yeah.
I can't think of a better handoff than that. Yes, Gary, you've nailed it. In Bism, Lewis is redeeming the depths for us. So this is a book about being swallowed up. It's a book about what happens when the inside doesn't match the outside of something, and it's scary. It's a book about what happens when you go and the giants welcome you, but they just want to eat you. Like all of this imagery of being in the depths, of being consumed, of being eaten, of having something powerful. It's basic and it's childlike. Like it's deeply scary. Poor Jill Pole is being eaten at Experiment House, to the point where when she goes and she's thirsty, all she can think of is that lion's going to eat me. He's going to swallow me up. And he says it. He says he's going to be swallowed up, boys and girls, men and women, kingdoms. Lewis is redeeming the depths for us.
Hmm.
The evil enchantress couldn't get down there.
Hmm.
She couldn't corrupt Bism. Those trees were growing, that river of fire was flowing, those white hot salamanders were glowing.
Hmm.
There is something deeper than that deep hidden evil. There is a hidden goodness deeper than hidden evil, and it's good.
Hmm.
And it's good. We're put in mind of the deeper magic that Aslan talks about of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe here. The White Witch had deep magic. That's true. Aslan's was deeper.
Mhm.
Lewis is telling us of his belief that at the bottom of it all, the
Hmm.
bottom of the world is goodness.
Hmm.
So in a way, you're saying that Aslan was Lord of all.
Yes, this is the gift that Jill and company take back with them to the surface. Rillian wants to go down there. They all want to go down there. And it sets them free from a particular type of fear, which we might share with them. A
Hmm.
fear of the depths.
That is
What's
right.
in the depths of my soul? Sometimes there's a witch in there. Can I believe that there's something deeper than that darkness, that there is a light deeper than the darkness, that there is a goodness deeper than the evil, that there is a truth deeper than the deception? Lewis is giving us that image. If you go deep enough, Lewis says, through the symbolism of this beautiful little parenthetical anecdote, most of us flip past this. We just think it's a little world building exercise. But if you go deep enough, Lewis says, it is warm, not cold. It is light, not dark. It is alive, not dead. Bism thinks of our world as the dead world.
Hmm.
Because they're down at the roots where the jewels are still alive.
Hmm.
If you go deep enough, it is good, not evil. The depths belong to Aslan as much as the heights do.
Wow. Can I
And
pause
Lewis,
pause for
yes, yes, please
just
follow.
almost overwhelming in the good way is I'm feeling this almost the harrowing of hell of Holy Saturday, where Christ crucified now descends into the realm of the dead. We're never told. There's not much written about what did he do there, other than save those who had not had a chance to know him. But you get this vision is it has all the accoutrements of hell. It's way down in, it's full of fire,
Yes.
images, but it turns out to be quite different in the way you're describing it, where even, and there's a tiny bit of the ancient tradition that argued that finally even Satan will give up and kneel before God and say, damn, you're good. What a fool I've been all along. So there's something that it's this incredible transformation of what we would expect hell to be.
Yes.
Transformed. Wow.
And even the Earthmen, Lewis made them like little imps. They have beaks, they have chicken feet, they have all the medieval accoutrements of little imps and little miniature demons, but they're not evil. They're transformed.
Yeah. Wow.
It's amazing. Aslan's goodness is there. Aslan's goodness is there. Lewis had to have thought of Romans 8. I am persuaded, St. Paul writes, that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature, no giant, no witch, shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus, our Lord. And he had to have thought of 1 Corinthians 15. When this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. Remember who does the swallowing? Aslan. Aslan has swallowed, and Aslan will swallow up death as well. So I think that Bism, the lowest point of the world in this imagined world, the hinge point where they've gone down to this spot where they can actually, they don't go there, but they can see down into that. I think this is something of what transforms Jill Pole. Because she gets the sense that at the base and root of the world is not a cold, dead stone tomb, but the light and abundant life of a place like Bism. So let's bring this together a little bit. Whose story? Lots of people's, but I would argue it's mostly Jill's story. What's it about? I think it's about being eaten up. You see it in the giants. You see it again and again and again. This theme of being swallowed. The earth itself swallows this group, right? And then brings them back to the surface. How does evil enchantment work? Whether it's the Emerald Witch or Experiment House? Well, the powerful eat the small, right? The lions eat the little girls, right? They look good, but they're bad. Lies, bullying. But what does her journey into Underland show her? What does she bring back up? It's way more than a prince. The lost prince comes back. That's great. But she brings back way more than that. She brings back the sense, and this we get to take with us too, that the deepest depths in the world are good. That Aslan can swallow up all of it. And what does this lead to for Jill? Freedom. We'll meet her again. She comes back. I don't want to spoil it too much if you haven't finished the series, but she comes back at the very end of the world, very end of Narnia. And it's a very different Jill Pole that we meet. Very different from the mousy, difficult Jill at the beginning of the Silver Chair. It's a Jill set free by what she experienced down in Underland. And of course, we mentioned this already. We would be remiss not to note the wonderful character that Puddleglum is. Who's at the center of it? Well, Puddleglum, who's different on the inside than we'd expect. He's hopeful. He's not despairing. He's encouraging, even while saying the most pessimistic things possible. So let's consider this. Jill is used by Aslan from the highest heights to the lowest depths of the world to set a prisoner free. That in turn liberates her and changes her. Her journey to the depths, and especially her view into that weird, strange, magical land of Bism, brings something to life in her that was imprisoned before. Her outer deliverance, going back to Experiment House and having a really abusive situation change, her outer deliverance comes after and because of her inner deliverance. It was set free on the inside first. She sees the beauty of the hidden depths in Bism, in Puddleglum, in Aslan, who starts off so scary until she realized that being swallowed up by him would be good, and of the hidden depths in herself. That's a lot. Now let's let those images bleed back into our world for a moment. I think what Lewis is trying to communicate to us, and that little phrase on the front of that first edition, a story for children, I think that's really true. I think this is for children. And I think we need to be children here and receive it for ourselves. I think what Lewis is trying to tell us is that we can brave the depths of interiority of our soul and of the world, and that we can do so believing that the deepest depths are good. The Silver Chair as a book tends to speak to people who have experienced grief and loss, those unfixable problems in life that we all encounter. I, in moments of my own life, have known what it feels like to feel swallowed up by despair, to feel eaten. I have been swallowed. At moments, I have felt like Rillian, imprisoned in myself, where my only moments of clarity feel given to me to torment me, where the truth hurts. Is that the end of the story? When we are so low, are we simply removed from Aslan by that much? Does every step on the downward journey into Underland mean we go farther from the lion who is our joy and our strength? Or what if his love and care and life and warmth and goodness is under our feet too, that whole time? That every step on the descent, while difficult, frightening, disorienting, and hard, what if every step is not a step away from him? What if the deepest depths are good? We can be Jill. We can be Puddleglum. Faithful in the dark, despite our character flaws, despite our mindset, by simply faithfully doing the best we can. It's a moment of faith that changes everything. When Puddleglum realizes maybe everything he ever believed about Aslan or about Narnia is fake, but he's going to cling to it in spite of it all. And it's that moment of faith and clarity that saves them all. We can work to be discerning between what a thing looks like and what a thing is. There are many moments in our life where what appears on the surface to be beautiful is ugly inside, and where what appears on the surface to be ugly is actually beautiful. Where what seems like a blessing turns out to be a curse, and what seems to be a curse turns out to be a blessing. The one who holds the world from the heights of Aslan's country to the depth of Bism, that one can be trusted. There is hope. And I would say that if somehow in the great economy of the spirit, St. Paul was able to appear and to comment on the words that Rick read at the beginning of this time, I have accepted the loss of all things. This from a man, St. Paul, who knew what it was to lose all things. I think he would recognize something of that peek into Bism. I think he would recognize something that at the roots of the world is light, is warmth, is love, is joy.
Hmm.
And that when you realize that you are held by that one whose hand is under the depths and over the heights, that you can lose all things in between and accept that, knowing that you are still held.
Hmm.
So with that, I would like to open it up for further discussion. That's the great idea that I think the silver chair presents to us. The redeeming of the depths, so that we can then return to quotidian life, to everyday life, with a different eye to the interior of things, to the heart of things, and a different trust and a freedom of belief, because we have seen to the very roots of the world, through suffering and through difficulty, and somehow, quite counterintuitively, have been enlightened and warmed by it.
Hey, Mary.
That
Mary,
turn it back to the group.
Mary, do you want to take this moment to, Paul has put in a beautiful pause to allow us to take our break, and you can direct us to that before we come back for the final half an hour. Do you want to take us out of the share screen there and then say your good words to send us towards our refreshments? And then
Yeah. Paul, would you, oh, there it goes. Okay. Yes, well, typically what we do, we take just a quick pause, 5 minutes. Feel free to go use the restroom, refill your drink, or stay and chat. And then we'll come back on at 7:02, let's say, and we'll just continue on with the last final bit of discussion before we wrap up. So stay here or head out, and I'll bring everyone back together when we start back up in 5 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you, Mary.
Paul,
Yes.
I just had one question. Always confused me in the silver chair with the words under me. Who's me?
Hmm.
Yeah. So that portion of the story comes during the portion in the north where they're in the country of the giants. And you'll remember that one of the signs is indicating draws Jill's attention to those words. And Jill and the group interpret it as being a sign from Aslan. And the Lady of the Green Kirtle, of course, tries to talk them out of that. Oh, that's not rational at all. In fact, it's just the end of an old giant's nursery rhyme that's that's been left over for many ages, and that some old king of the giants had put into poetry, essentially a statement that the world was under him. So the voice is the voice of that ancient king of the giants. But of course, there's something more going on.
So the me is who? The giants? Or
Yep, an ancient king of the giants. Yes. Yeah, and yes, in the poem that is in the story, it's yeah, representative of their city or of their rule.
And I guess, as you would say then, Paul, is it's a word that goes both ways. So it's under me, meaning the ancient king, but it's me in the sense of, where are we supposed to go next, Aslan?
Under me.
Underneath there. Yeah.
Exactly.
This is Gary again. I love the attention you're giving to Puddleglum. He's just such a sort of unsightly, both sort of emotionally and physically scrawny little guy. And yet he's the one who actually steps up, and by burning his foot, sacrificing his own body, he helps to open the door to the rescue of Brilliant. The other thing that, which is the sort of the moral gem of his character, but the other thing that is really telling to me is he's constantly referred to as sort of looking like and smelling like mud. And, he's a person of the earth in the most plain and unsightly way. And yet that's where this gem of character is encased in certain respects in the heart of the story. So I love that, this is all about the sort of the nastiness, the darkness, the filth of certain aspects of the world. And here we are underneath the hidden city of the giants and so on. And yet here comes this person of mud who raises the story to a new level of triumph and care. I love
That's so well said, Gary. I know that quite a few of our members here might be on break. So when we come back, why don't you kick off our time by restating that, drawing our attention to Puddle Glum?
Sure, you'd be delighted. Yeah.
And I would say too, Paul, I was thinking of, through your comment, Gary, about, I call it Puddle Glum's foot, how people have a complex relation to the pains they feel. They assume that they're wrong and need to go away. But sometimes pain is the one thing that cuts through to the truth. It's the one that breaks the enchantment. And his stepping right in the fire helped snap him into awareness when he was falling under her considerable power, and it breaks it. So it puts a completely different take on pain and how we often don't understand it properly and why it exists.
Well, and the salvific quality of pain. I mean, there's Jesus is hanging on the cross.
Yeah.
At some level, that which we just fight at every point of our life to avoid winds up being this narrow portal through which comes salvation. And it's the salvation through our character, it's salvation through the disregard of the physicality that seems to be so in control of how we make our decision.
There we go. All right. I'm gonna ring my little bell. Let's go ahead and come back on. And
Sweetie.
Hey, Mary, is that Jill Pole right there, or is that?
wouldn't you think? My tiny little mini me joining us. Okay, we'll keep going for the last little bit here.
I love it. Well, we talked a little bit about Puddle Glum during the break, and Gary had some great insightful things to say, and so did Rick. I wonder if we could just briefly touch on those. The image is, like you said, Gary, of Puddle Glum being made of mud, and then you use this interesting word that he had a gem of character inside him.
Yeah.
Almost like a hidden emerald in the mud, right? Something very precious. But the one that you would expect to be another instance of the inside not matching the outside. But comment for a moment on that, and then let's perhaps talk as a group about some of the more prominent images or favorite moments from the book that are specifically meaningful to us.
Sure. I was just mentioning over the break that I love this character, Puddle Glum. In so many ways, he's just unsightly. He's got to be reflective of something. He's muddy. He's skinny. He smells. I mean, all of these things that you just sort of don't want to be around him. And yet, at the crucial moment where no one can actually open the door to the liberation of Rillium except him, he slams his foot onto the fire, which is a terrible, painful thing to have happen. And he opens the door to the completion of the whole mission of the children. And Rillian is ultimately saved and so on. So I was just commenting that I love this character, and the fact that he's of mud also to me reflects Lewis's real emphasis upon things that are not of the light and the spirit and so on, are nonetheless sacred. And there's this gem of his character that breaks through. He's willing to have the pain. Everybody wants to avoid pain. he knew that that was not what was needed at that moment, and he gave himself up. A saving Christ-like moment to actually break through and with the salvation of William. So I just love that character.
Hmm.
And I think that's so insightful, Gary. He's certainly my favorite from the C.S. Lewis corpus, and just such a perfectly articulated character. And yeah, it's great that muddy, nasty, off-putting character would be the source of so much beauty and deliverance. What other images or scenes from the book captured you as you were reading? Or what shall we?
I was wondering, Paul, if little Cora Lynn had a favorite spot in the story.
Well, we are actually a book behind, so we're just finishing Dawn Treader and haven't met Petalblum yet.
Okay, very good.
Well, it'll be fun when you get there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Thought it was interesting how Aslan's instructions to Jill accounted for the fact that they would go off course to the gentle giants.
Oh,
Yes, that's a brilliant observation, Tim.
I never noticed that. That's brilliant. Huh.
Yeah.
Never noticed that.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, one of the things that struck me, I'm very uncomfortable with the language of gobbling up and being eaten, as I'm sure Jill was when she first heard the lion and saw his jaws. There's something frightening in the image. But it also I kept getting reminded of when Christ offers us the greatest closeness, he gives us his body and blood to eat, and we gobble him up. And so there's something there, not just about the gobbling, but when you eat something, it actually becomes part of your very self. You can't distinguish the otherness of a hamburger or a piece of asparagus from you. It literally becomes part of your very self. So it's not the gobbling, it's what happens as a result that you got me thinking about here. Yep.
I think that's so true and so beautiful. And I think Jill has that sense of gobbling or being swallowed up changed completely, because especially at the end, and can we notice the beauty of the final chapter titled "The Healing of Harms,"
Yeah.
which extends both from Aslan's country, where the old, decrepit, dead King Caspian is placed under that stream, the same stream that Jill encountered and was so thirsty for when she first came into that country. The corpse is laid in that stream. And do you remember what Eustace is told to do? Go and to pluck a thorn in a thicket nearby, and to drive it into the pad of the lion's paw, so that the blood drips into the stream, and the old king is changed and brought back to life. So that picture of passion, of Christ's passion, of the pierced hand, the pierced paw, producing blood, being swallowed up is, to be swallowed up means your essence is being absorbed by another, right? Like what you are is being taken by another. But in this case, Aslan's essence, his blood, is being freely given through pain and through loss, through the real pain and loss of that lion. It's not just magic, to restore and to give to another. And that's what it means to be swallowed up. by Aslan and I think by Christ as well.
Hmm.
Elizabeth, why don't you go ahead, and then Vana, if you had something after, feel free to jump in. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Thank you. At the beginning, you read aloud that wonderful quote of Aslan to Jill at the beginning, where he says something about how I have devoured kings and cities and so on. And I love it, and it's poetic, but it's also made me a little uncomfortable because there's a thread throughout C.S. Lewis's work of Christianity in the language of conquest and conquering and powerful triumph. And I have struggled with how to reconcile that with a more modern sensibility that prizes peace and pacifism. And I wonder how you, both with that quote and throughout C.S. Lewis, throughout the Narnia books anyway, how you encounter that and how you reconcile that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, I think with the Narnia books, as with so much of historical literature, we'll often encounter things that, being from out of our century or from off of our continent, strike us as difficult for various reasons. In the same way that somebody from either our past or our future might find things that our own perspectives on faith difficult. And so I try to read with a sense of generosity, as much generosity as I can muster, believing that C.S. Lewis was doing the best that he could and that I am doing the best that I can, and those 2 points may not always muster. I think that particularly when it comes to Aslan, the character is well developed enough to greatly nuance that language of kings and kingdoms. How has he swallowed up the kings and kingdoms? Well, he destroyed the White Witch. In the end, he gobbled her up, which every kid's book needs the lion to gobble up the witch. That's just an essential. But that deeper magic was not the magic of power, or not the magic of power through force. It was the magic of power that could absorb evil into itself. And I think of that ancient phrase, how Christ trampled down death by death, as being really essential to the character of Aslan. So while there are moments, The Horse and His Boy have certainly some dated cultural moments to modern sensibilities, that core of Aslan's character as not being the one who sort of stands up and tells King Caspian to shake it off and get out of, bring yourself back to life, but weeps and bleeds. That just gives to me so much scope for the imagination and so much scope for the heart, that while, yeah, there are some things I'd phrase differently in Lewis at many times that I bump into, that generosity and scope of spirit in Aslan's character forms sort of shock absorbers for me. I can bounce over some of those things that otherwise might be more difficult, because I see the beauty from my perspective of what he's working to do there. So I'm
Thank
sure
you.
that's an imperfect answer, but
No, it's great. Thanks.
that's how
I'd like to offer something about that too, because that's such an interesting observation.
Mhm.
When I look at Lewis's life, he was 16 when World War I broke out, the war to end all wars. Later in his life, in his mature years, Hitler burst upon the scene. It's really hard for us to imagine how that can affect the life of a morally oriented person, the helplessness that was sort of in the background of that. That's number one. But what I love about what's happening here is there's a fierceness to Aslan, a fierceness to how he loves and how he rescues. And it's easy for us to mistake fierceness for a sort of unsightly power grab. Uh, in our world, when people get fierce, it's usually because they're doing pretty rotten things. But he's rescuing fierceness by saying, you know, I will never stop loving every single person in this story. And I haven't read all of the others, so I'm really not commenting on this whole canon of the Narnia stories, but there is a sweetness about Aslan, even as he's fierce. And so I see pacifism, peace, all of those things need to have a rigid spine to them too. And in a really great people like Martin Luther King or Gandhi, they were fierce, but not in this bad way. So I kind of think that I see that happening with Lewis, and at least in this story.
Yeah.
It's beautifully said. It's good to remember too that Lewis's imagination, remember the person who baptized his imagination. Does anybody remember who that writer was that Lewis said baptized his imagination?
MacDonald.
George MacDonald, exactly. It's important to remember that George MacDonald was criticized throughout his entire ministry as a pastor, throughout his entire work as a writer, for being essentially too soft, too oriented towards love. But MacDonald, and though I might quibble with him on more than one point of theology, you just can't quibble with his heart. And for him, a vision of Christian universalism and the eventual redemption, MacDonald argued, of all things, similar to what Rick had nodded to earlier, was not weak in the least. In fact, his vision of God was tremendously, definitively strong and severe, not evil or cruel, but severe. And God's extreme compassion was balanced by that spine that you phrased so beautifully, Gary. And for MacDonald, the book Lilith, which contains just a really, really gorgeous picture, would be an interesting counterpoint to read, especially against the Silver Chair here. And I'd recommend that if you haven't read it, Elizabeth. I think that would actually be an interesting thing to balance and think about. Because Lilith, the key character there, is also a witch. She also has imprisoned an entire land of small, helpless beings under her rule. And she eventually comes to a point where she is defeated, but not destroyed. In Lewis, she's destroyed. Right? The witch is she's killed, she's done, she's gone. White Witch is the same in Lion Witch in the Wardrobe. Aslan gobbles her up, she's gone. MacDonald, it's more nuanced and it's more difficult, to the point where she's defeated, but she holds in her hand, and you've got to read the book to really understand it. She holds in her hand the source of life for this kingdom. It's like a source of water. So it's all magical and symbolic. If she opens her hand, the kingdom will come back to life and be set free, because the water, the river, will begin flowing again. But she's closed it for so long that even when she's defeated, even when she's given up her pretensions to queenship, even when she wants to do it, she can't. She can't, because her soul has been so malformed that she is clinging to power she can't let go. It's like her fingers can't open even when she wants them to. And so she pleads with one of the main figures. Does anyone remember what she asks them to do, if you've read the book? She pleads, cut off my hand. I can't do this on my own. Cut my hand off. And they do it. As soon as they sever that from her body, her hand opens and there's restoration. But there's loss for her. She loses the hand. But she, the villain of that story, Lilith, who's the analog of the Green Witch here, she is redeemed. So there would be so Lewis's imagination was baptized by someone with considerably more nuance for that type of redemption for those core characters. Why we don't see that here, I'm not sure. Lewis wrote these really, really quickly. We know that. He was very thoughtful about it, but they're also quick. moments of imperfection. But it would be interesting to sit back and consider some of McDonald's wrestlings with similar themes.
Paul, can you answer? I've always been puzzled by when they killed the witch, then was it Rillian who destroyed the silver chair with a sword?
Yeah. Mhm.
I was always a little puzzled by that because that was the one place in his entire enslavement that really gave him the truth of who he was. When he sat in it, it was the moment that reminded him he's of royal blood and he belongs to the upper world.
Mm.
In some ways, that's the blessing.
Yeah.
The one thing that caused him not to completely forget, even though in that country, to know the truth of his life was like torture, because the queen wanted him to realize how much he'd lost every time he sat in that chair and prove to him. But it's an interesting that would be the first thing he'd turn and destroy. I was just puzzled, and I wondered if you had an insight about that.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to find the passage. If I remember correctly, he calls it like foul engine of sorcery or something like that. Engine of sorcery sticks in my mind. I can't find the passage right now. But if I remember correctly, it was either part of his imprisonment, like a magical object that was related to his bondage, or just the physical restraint that was used to hold him. So when he did during that 1 hour of torment where he could see and knew who he was and knew he was underground and couldn't get back home, it was the physical engine that was holding him there. So I think I could understand that hatred towards an instrument of one's own restraint or torment there. Powerlessness. It's a symbol of his powerlessness. Yeah. From the chat, Tim says that he thought the Emerald Queen was the spirit of Jadis reborn. She had already appeared in Prince Caspian. Yes, the Emerald Queen is somebody else. They don't definitively answer it, but I think it's Puddleglum says one of those sort related to the White Witch. So she is different than Jadis, but one of the same sort. Of course, in The Magician's Nephew, we remember Jadis herself when we first meet her in the city of Charn, recounting a great battle against, does anybody remember who her great opponent was that she eventually defeated with the deplorable word?
Was it a sibling?
It's her sister.
Yeah.
Yes, her sister. So we know for a fact Jadis herself had already done great and terrible battle that destroyed her entire world with her own sister. So maybe she's a sister, maybe a cousin, maybe who knows? But we're not told. Just one of the same sort is what the speculation is.
So I'll get you, Paul, I'll leave it to you to have a sense of completeness or not. You can just check in with people, and if it feels like we got back to Narnia and we're sitting around the fire with all the animals, we finally got home, then you feel free to bring it to a conclusion when you wish.
Great. Well, does anyone have a last thought? I don't want to cut anyone short. So if you have a last thought, speak now or forever hold your peace. And then I'll wrap us briefly and then hand us back to Mary and Rick. But last call, bars closing. Okay. Well, if all hearts are clear, then I will just say thank you. Thank you for this time, for the opportunity to share about one of my very, very favorite books from Lewis and my personal favorite of the Narnian Chronicles. And I hope just from one person, from one soul to another, that some of the images that we've sat with tonight will go with you. I think that one of the hardest but truest teachings of the historic Christian tradition is that every one of us at some point has to face the dark night, the depths. We have to make a descent into a place we would rather not go, but we must. There is a mustness to it. So whether those moments of your life are behind you or still ahead of you, my hope is that the images from this time, particularly of the true depths of the world being a place of joy and of light and of life and of peace and of inner fire, that can enliven your imagination. And like Aslan indicated, like that scene in Narnia could lead back into our world here and give you something useful and practical as a resource for the soul, so that perhaps at a very dark moment, a little light of Bism can shine into the darkness that you might experience. So with that in mind, Rick and Mary, back to you. And thanks everyone for a wonderful conversation tonight.
My goodness, Paul, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. And our next book that we'll be reading in the Chronicles of Narnia series and discussing is The Horse and His Boy. So that will be the first Monday in March, March 4th, back here online in your own homes. And we will also, between now and then, we have our night school class, which will be the last Tuesday of February with our special guest, Jean Danlo. Is that right? And that is our ongoing night school series that is currently focused on the idea of angels. So we have that in person here in Portland, but also streaming online for any of you farther away. And also for any of you in Portland, we have a retreat, an all-day Saturday retreat this Saturday here in the Portland area, February 10th from 9 to 3:30, led by Father Giens and also Tara Ludwig, who is part of the Institute and will be giving talks on a retreat that will kind of help us lead into the Lenten season, which, hard to believe, it is coming up next week. So we'd love for you to join if you're local, or even if you're in California and want to fly up for the day like Barry, which is just so awesome. So lots going on in the next month. I'll send an email out tomorrow with some reminders and some follow-up notes, links to recordings of tonight's class. And just thank you again to our friend Paul. If you haven't heard Paul speak with the Faber Institute before, there are a couple other talks that he's given. So I'll link those in the email tomorrow. Some other wonderful classes on books and people and poets that he's done for us here at the Faber Institute before. So feel free to unmute and even turn your screens on to say good night. And we hope to see you next month or sometime before then. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Paul, this was wonderful. I so appreciate the richness of your familiarity with the material and the spiritual insights you shared. Very grateful.
Well, thank you, Gary. What a great time to be together and discuss such an excellent book.
I just thank you so much, because I felt that there was so much symbolism that passed by me in these books, and how you connected all that makes me want to go back and read for sure. Thank you so much, Paul.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. Thank you, Anne.